Game over. That's what Donald Trump tweeted after the release in redacted form of the Mueller Report. He appears to think his worries are over. Arriving in Florida for the Easter break, he was characteristically bullish.
Game over, folks. Now it's back to work.
The report found Trump made numerous attempts to obstruct the investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the 2016 election. But Mueller said he could not conclusively determine that Trump had committed a criminal act. He also detailed extensive contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia, but said they too didn't amount to a criminal conspiracy. Trump's advisor, Kellyanne Conway, said it was case closed.
We're accepting apologies today, too, for anybody who feels the grace in offering them. There was no collusion, and there certainly was no criminal conspiracy with any Russians. That report makes very clear that this White House and this president and none of us got in their way.
But Democrats say it's far from clear that the president didn't try to obstruct the course of justice.
The idea that the report proves no obstruction is completely at odds with hundreds of pages in the report which document efforts by the president to undermine the investigation.
Democrats are demanding that an unredacted version of the report is made available to Congress, allowing them to continue the investigation.
If the special counsel, as he made clear, had found evidence exonerating the president, he would have said so. He did not. He left that issue to the Congress of the United States, and we will need to consider it.
For Trump, the Mueller report is finally behind him. But the 2020 elections are looming, and his political opponents are unlikely to be so accommodating.
Joining me here in the studio is Tyson Barker, a U.S. politics analyst with the Aspen Institute, who also served in the U.S. State Department under President Obama. And from Washington, I'm happy to welcome tonight Coley Stimson, a former trial lawyer who served in the George W. Bush administration and is now with the Heritage Foundation. And also in Washington, our very own Helena Humphrey joins me from our bureau. Helena has been on this story all day for us. To all of you, welcome. Helena, I'm going to start with you and then go around to everyone. What does the Mueller report mean for the Trump presidency now compared to what it meant yesterday?
Brent, today the battle lines have been redrawn in this. It certainly sharpened the resolve of the Democrats, I think. It means that they have more meat, essentially, to dig into, and boy, they are certainly digging into it. We've just heard from Pelosi and Schumer in a joint statement, and they've said, OK, looking at this, it's quite clear to see that the Attorney General William Barr's definition of obstruction of justice and that set out by the Special Counsel Robert Mueller are two different things. We've also heard from the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, and he says, OK, it's very interesting that Robert Mueller decided not to make a prosecutorial decision, not because he is unable to do so. This is a man with a wealth of experience in this matter, but more because he believes that he has set out a roadmap for Congress to deal with this. Now, I've quoted Jerry Nadler on this before, and I will quote him again. Something which is impeachable may not be a crime. Something which is a crime may not be impeachable. I do not think this is case closed by any stretch.
And Coley Stimson, what do you say about the meaning of the report today?
I think the Attorney General, that he's going to let the report speak for itself. I know that the Democrats were very upset that he went out and did a press conference before the release to them of the report and to the public. But the report does speak for itself, and the Attorney General made that quite clear. And I don't agree that Mr. Barr, the Attorney General, who's been the Attorney General once before, has a different definition of obstruction of justice than Mueller does. Remember, they're friends. They both work in the Justice Department at the highest levels, so have I. And the report lays out the various theories of obstruction of justice, and as you said in your lead-up, could not conclude that he did it, but it could not exonerate him.
Tyson, has the report changed anything?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it essentially put a stamp of, let's say, highest credibility on a 2-year investigation, which both sides of the aisle have said has been conducted with the utmost integrity. Mitch McConnell came out and said that he has the highest trust and faith in Robert Mueller, and laid out 10 counts of what the assessors judged to be essentially evidence of obstruction of justice. I mean, the evidence definitely of intent is there. I mean, we have essentially all the dots connected, and the breaking of those dots happened at the level of staff. It didn't happen with the president himself. If the president was able to execute his will, this investigation would have been obstructed.
Yeah, the Mueller report, it clearly states that the U.S. president, picking up what you said, Tyson, tried to interfere with the investigation numerous times and was not successful because the people that he needed to carry out his wishes refused to do so. Helena, I want you to take a listen to what Barr said today.
The report recounts 10 episodes involving the president and discusses potential legal theories for connecting those activities to the elements of an obstruction offense. After carefully reviewing the facts and legal theories outlined in the report, and in consultation with the Office of Legal Counsel and other department lawyers, the Deputy Attorney General and I concluded that the evidence developed by the special counsel is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense.
So that is what the Attorney General said today. If you take that further, do we find a green light somewhere for impeachment proceedings? Helena.
I think there are many arguments in this, and a lot of it looks at President Trump's trajectory, going from a presidential candidate to president himself when we talk about obstruction of justice. And Bob Woodward's book, for example, Fear, sets the president out at times as a candidate bumbling through, making requests, and people around him saying, essentially, no, we cannot do that. That would be illegal. Then at other points, what we're seeing today in the Mueller report, accusations, for example, at least reports about the firing, for example, of the FBI Director James Comey in relation to this report. Trump then seeking to see Mueller taken out of this report as well, out of his investigation. So it's manifold and it evolves over time. But if we take past as prologue, what we can certainly say is that these kinds of investigations haven't ended well for presidents in the past. If you take a look at Watergate, for example, Nixon resigning. If you take a look at the Ken Starr report and then the impeachment of Bill Clinton. But Bill Clinton was called Teflon Bill. It seemed that nothing would stick. Now are we seeing a new chapter, something defying all convention with Trump? I think that is the question as well. Yeah,
and Cully, let me ask you used to be a trial lawyer. I mean, if you had someone in a case that had tried 10 times to obstruct justice and it didn't work, but, they tried 10 times, and you had that documented, you wouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt, would you?
I would look at all the facts and circumstances of what that individual did in that case and make an independent judgment of whether they had the requisite mens rea, that is the mental intent to obstruct justice under that either state or federal statute wherever I was prosecuting. And I've done it at the state and federal level. Here, my reading of the report is that there are a number of instances, 10, that Mueller found, where the president took actions like talking to one of his campaign advisors, talking to his White House counsel, talking to the then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, asking him to unrecuse himself, and a number of other actions where the people just simply refused to do what he asked them to do. And the question is not a legal one now, because now we're past the Attorney General himself deciding to go forward with criminal charges. It's a political question. Does Nancy Pelosi and her advisors think, as a political matter, that there was a high crime and misdemeanor that was done by the president, and given the cumulative evidence that they're going to say constituted obstruction, decide to march forward down the impeachment road, understanding that even if the House impeaches him, it has to go to the Senate for the trial.
Right. Yeah, but doesn't what we learned today, though, doesn't that increase the likelihood? I mean, it's certainly going to increase the pressure on Pelosi to go forward with impeachment. I mean, these are not misdemeanors. I mean, these are serious accusations, and they're documented. I mean, they're in the Mueller report.
Well, if you're asking it for me, yeah. I do think that the pressure on the Speaker of the House, who's the third in line to be the president in our country, will be immense, especially from the left, whether or not she decides to live by her own standard that she laid out a while ago, and that is she's not going to commence impeachment proceedings unless she has some buy-in from Republicans in the House to do so, because she doesn't want it to be seen as a solely partisan matter, remains to be seen. But as people start absorbing this report and actually read from beginning to end, and I suspect the number is a very small number of people who actually read it from beginning to end, time will tell whether they make the political judgment that it's better to commence impeachment proceedings or just continue politically to beat the president and his administration over the head with facts from the Mueller report.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say that it is, we were talking about this earlier, Tyson, it's well written. It's almost like a novel. And the fact that you do have lots of redacted areas, it makes for fast reading. Tyson, what about Nancy Pelosi, though? I mean, the Democrats are in a conundrum now, aren't they?
Well, I think there are a number of known unknowns, to use Don Rumsfeld's phrase. I mean, you know, I think that she's done a pretty good job at marshaling her caucus and marshaling the opinion of her base to support any action that she finds would lead to the outcome that they see as most just within the law. And if that seems to be the avenue of impeachment, I think that that's the avenue that they will pursue. If it's the avenue of further investigation to see if there are grounds for impeachment, I think that that's something they will pursue. And I think that that will happen rather quickly because, as was talked about in Barr's press conference, you know, he will be going up to the Hill to testify. He has allowed for Robert Mueller to go to the Hill to testify as well. There are disagreements between the two, which he admitted during the press conference today, so those are going to have to be explored a little further. And then there are elements of the investigation that have likely been farmed out to other law enforcement agencies, other elements of the justice system, including the state of New York and the Southern District.
I mean, those are excellent points. I wonder, though, when you take all of this out to Middle America, if you're going to find a lot of passion about this. Now, you're in the U.S., and, you know, we're hearing from all of the Democratic presidential candidates. They're saying that when they go, you've been to Iowa, they've been to New Hampshire already, that people are not talking about the Mueller report. They're talking about health care. I mean, does that diminish, then, the power of this report to push Nancy Pelosi towards impeachment?
Right, absolutely, and that is where Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are going to be very careful in how they make this decision. They're going to have to be pretty sure that they're going to have a good case for impeachment should they want to push forward with proceedings on that front, because if they try and they fail, people in the rest of the country are going to either say that, you know, Trump was vindicated, this was a witch hunt, or that the Democrats spent too much time caught up in the toing and froing of the Mueller report when significant issues to them, whether it's wages, health care, child care, the Green New Deal, environmental policy, whatever it may be on the left which has voters concerned, is not tackled in the run-up to the 2020 election. Yeah. So really there's got to be some soul-searching now, I think, in the Democratic Party with how they move forward now that they've got this report in their hands.
Tyson, you want to say something briefly?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we all agree that this is going to be a referendum on Trump, the election in 2012. I mean, essentially... 2020, excuse me. The impeachment is going to take place on Election Day, and the removal from office, if it is to happen, is going to take place on Inauguration Day.
Okay, so maybe then impeachment, the proceeding is not needed. Let's take a listen to what the House Judiciary Chairman Nadler said today about the Attorney General, and then we'll go to Coley. Take a listen, though, to what he said.
First, to observe, Attorney General Barr appears to have shown an unsettling willingness to undermine his own department in order to protect President Trump. Barr's words and actions suggest he has been disingenuous and misleading in saying the president is clear of wrongdoing.
Coley, in February, you wrote that William Barr is the right man for the job of AG, and you quoted him where he said nothing, or he had written nothing could be more destructive of our system of government or for the Department of Justice than any toleration of political interference with the enforcement of the law. Is he now compromised because of this report and the way he's handled it?
Not at all. I respectfully disagree with Chairman Nadler. I think Attorney General Barr has nothing to prove. He's been the Attorney General once before and served with distinction. He followed the law. The law that the Congress passed and a previous president passed assigns to the Attorney General the sole discretion to decide whether to release the report and how much of it to release. Nobody else. If they wanted to change the law, they could have changed it. And the law does not prohibit the Attorney General from laying out in a press conference a very brief overview of the process he used, as transparent as he could be about it. So I just respectfully disagree with Chairman Nadler, and I think Attorney General Barr has conducted himself with the utmost aplomb. And I also think that when he testifies in May, and he said he'd be more than happy to testify in April, but the Congress has put off his testimony till May, that he'll prove once again that he's been the right man for the job.
Yeah. He also said today that he would have no problem with Robert Mueller testifying as well. Let's talk about the U.S. president for a moment. Today, Mr. Trump, he reacted to the report with this tweet. We want to pull this up and show the viewers. There we go. No collusion, no obstruction for the haters and the radical left Democrats. Game over. He likes the Game of Thrones image there. Khalil, I'll go back to you. Trump told reporters today that he's a happy man. Is he reading the same report that we all have tonight?
I have no idea what he's reading, but I do know that with respect to a comment your other guest, my colleague made earlier, when candidates make their rounds around the country, they're going to be listening to people. And if the Mueller report and the conclusion that there was no underlying crime, no collusion, sinks in, and people are worried about paychecks and school education and health care and all the rest of it, that may crowd to the back of the burner this issue on most people's plates. And the Democrats are savvy, just like Republicans are running for office, and they're going to realize that the tea leaves are such that they probably should not commence impeachment proceedings. Do you think people are, I hate to use the term jaded, but in a way, jaded, Tyson? I mean, if they're worried about, being unemployed, then the behavior and the values of the president really don't matter.
Well, it's a worry, and honestly, for voters, for most voters in the middle of the country, wherever voters are, it permeates all issues. So if you're worried about something like healthcare or education, and that's a primary issue, which was the primary issue for many voters in the midterm elections that led to the Democratic victories, your trust in government is very important. And if you have the suspicion or the inclination that the president has obstructed justice in many instances, then that's going to lead you to have a distrust in government, which is going to make things more difficult. But to the extent that you want to rid that dark cloud that exists over the presidency and over the faith in government for these public institutions, then that might feed into a narrative that leads to people to take that to the ballot box.
And Helena, you are in Washington, you report for us, we speak to the world. We hear time and time again that the perception of the U.S. president is not a good one. And regardless of politics, this report, people are going to read about it or read it, and they're going to come away with, okay, no collusion. But the U.S. president, if he could have gotten away with it, he would have obstructed justice. What does that do then for the standing of the office of the presidency in the world?
Something that always stands out to me, Brent, when I travel across the country is that many people will say, I don't necessarily support the president, but I stand behind him because he is the president of the United States. And President Trump has these refrains of no collusion, no obstruction, and people who don't have the luxury of time to read through this report do cling on to those kinds of sound bites. So I think what we might see in the election is that people move away from this Mueller report, that to a certain extent this could be a DC luxury problem, that we can dive into it, despite the fact, as Tyson points out, justice and, a presidential office being fair, of course, affects every layer of government. We shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And unfortunately, we're out of time. Cully Stimpson from the Heritage Foundation, Helena Humphrey in Washington. To both of you, thank you. And Tyson Barker here at the big table with me from the Aspen Institute. As always, Tyson, we appreciate your insights. Thank you.